Hey everyone, my name's Jeff.
I'm Jeff.
And we're here to talk to you about the Atomik Barbwire boat. We've got a few things we want to go over to make sure that you get your boat set up correctly for the water and that your troubleshooting is down to a minimum so you can go out to the water and have some fun. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with our pre-run checklist. And the very first thing that you want to do is check the running hardware to make sure that everything is tight and secure. While we try to make sure that everything is right out of the box, through shipping, sometimes things can loosen up. We want to make sure that nothing unexpected happens out on the water. So let's start at the back of the boat. And first what we're going to start with is, here is the rudder. Now this is the part of the boat that turns the boat left and right. And at the top of it here you've got a screw. Now this screw needs to be tightened down securely on top of this wire to make sure that when you turn left and right that it stays in place and it handles the resistance of the water. So you want to check that screw there. Moving down the line you want to check the prop nut. You want to make sure that the prop nut is securely on there. You should see a thread or two at the end of the flex shaft indicating that it's on tight. The brass piece on the other side of the prop is called the drive dog. There is a grub screw there. You want to check that screw and make sure that it is tightened down. And then next you've got your turn fins, which again, these should be at about a 45-degree angle, and you just want to make sure that these are secure. You know, you're still going to be able to move them a little bit once they're tight, but they just need to be able to cut through the resistance of the water. Now let's move to the inside of the boat. Removing the hatch, the thing you're going to want to pay the most attention to is what we call the flex shaft coupler. Now this is the small aluminum cylindrical piece that goes in between the motor and the flex shaft, and it holds everything together. Now there's a grub screw on the shaft side. You want to make sure that that's tightened down properly on the motor side of things. And then on the flex shaft side you've got two grub screws, and you want to make sure that they're snug but not over tightened. You can over tighten these and cause some damage. It's super important that we take care of these grub screws on here, and you want to check these frequently. The amount of revolutions that this little piece makes is incredible, so you should really be checking this every single run. All right, let's move on to the next step.
The second step of your pre-run checklist is going to include inspecting your coolant lines for any leaks or cracks. This boat is equipped with a water cooling system for your electronic speed control and your motor mount. So there is a water pickup on the bottom of the hull that will pick up the lake water as the boat's moving, and that water is going to flow from that pickup tube into the electronic speed control, out of the electronic speed control into the water-cooled motor mount, out of that water-cooled motor mount, and exit the port side of the hull. Now, to inspect this, visually look at the coolant hoses. Make sure there are no cracks. Make sure that all of the connections are secure. And finally, you can pressure test this system by plugging one end and applying slight vacuum or air pressure to the other end. A simple way to do that is put your finger over the pickup on the bottom of the hull and blow into the water outlet port on the side of this boat. You should be able to build some pressure inside of this system, and when you move your finger from the pickup, you will hear all of that air exit the system. If for some reason, when you plug one end of the system and you blow in the other end of the system and you are experiencing some form of leak, you need to find that leak and secure this before you put the boat in the water.
All right, this next step is easy, but it is just as critical as the previous steps. We need to range test your boat. Now, with the boat powered on, both the transmitter and the receiver, it's very easy to do. Simply set the boat someplace where the prop and the rudder are clear of obstruction and you can clearly see them from a good distance away. Walk approximately 100 feet, looking at the rudder and the prop. Gently blip the throttle, make sure that the prop spins, make sure that the rudder moves back and forth when you turn the wheel left and right, just to make sure that the boat has good signal at about 100 feet away. Now you know that the boat has solid signal and should be able to receive any input that you give the transmitter. Now let's move on to the final step.
After you've performed your range test successfully, now you're ready to get out on the water and start playing with this thing. So you need to install the hatch to the hull of the boat. Start out with the tip of the hatch has a little notch that will go into a slot in the hull of the boat. Press securely on the hatch to make sure that it seals against the foam seal. Turn the hatch latch to where it is pointed towards the stern of the boat, and you will hear a satisfying click when the latch is secure. We do recommend running Atomik hatch tape across the seal of this hatch if you're going to be running it aggressively.
While it's not required, it's certainly an extra layer of protection to make sure that no excess water gets inside the boat. That finalizes the pre-run checklist. Next, we're going to go on to a few common things that we see here at Atomik that keep people out of the water that are super easy to fix right at the bench.
If during your pre-run checklist you ran into an issue with your boat and something didn't go as planned,
we want to make sure that we go through all of the processes we would normally go through over the phone with you in tech support just to check all the components to make sure that they're operating properly. In the event that something isn't working right, you're 100% covered through Atomik's warranty. But we want to make sure that it isn't something silly like a setting on the transmitter that's holding you back. So maybe when we're going through all this, when you move the steering wheel or you pull the trigger, nothing happens. Let's go through the bind process.
Okay, so always you need to start with powering the transmitter first. Turn on the transmitter. LED light indicates that the transmitter is on.
Make sure that it isn't beeping. That means that the batteries are starting to die and you need to replace them with fresh ones. Remember, that's your transmission signal, and the better the batteries are in the transmitter, the better the signal is and the further away you can take the boat.
Alright, so with the transmitter powered on, the prop clear, go ahead and connect your battery. You'll hear a series of beeps notifying you that you have connection. If you don't hear that series of beeps, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to need to locate the receiver inside of your boat. You could simply follow the antenna that comes out of the boat, follow that wire back to this little device. That is your receiver. There should be a little LED light on there. Now, if you have a solid green light, you should have connection between your transmitter and your receiver. If you have a solid red light, this means that you do not have a connection between your transmitter and your receiver. To gain connection, or to bind your transmitter and receiver, you need to press the bind button located on the receiver. Press and hold this button for close to 3 seconds. The solid red light should start to flash. This is the receiver searching for a signal from the transmitter. Once they are bound together, the light will turn solid green.
Now, if you find that your transmitter and your receiver aren't binding properly, go ahead and reach out to our customer service team. All of our contact information is in the instruction manual or on the outside of the packaging of the box, and we'd be more than happy to help you out with that and take care of any equipment failure that may be happening. All right, so we've established that the boat has good bind between the transmitter and the receiver inside the boat. But let's say that one of the channels isn't operating properly. Either the throttle or the steering, which is either channel 1 for the steering and channel 2 for the throttle, may or may not be working properly. So let's go ahead and troubleshoot those one at a time, starting with steering. Now on the transmitter, you're going to see a switch at the very top. Now that is the steering reverse switch. Now you could find that once you get the boat in the water, that the boat may turn left when you want it to turn right or vice versa. If this is happening, simply use the switch at the top of the controller and switch it from reverse to normal or vice versa, and the problem should be fixed. Going down the transmitter to the next set of buttons, you'll find the throttle trim and steering trim. Now we use these buttons to ensure that the boat is going straight and that the throttle is set properly to neutral throttle when the boat is at rest.
So below the trim buttons, the next two adjustments are the steering endpoint adjustments. These are knobs that will limit the amount of motion that the rudder can turn either to the left or to the right. So the ST/R will adjust the endpoint of the rudder turning to the right, and the ST/L knob will adjust the endpoint of turning left. So now that you have your transmitter adjustments set properly, let's go ahead and turn the transmitter off, and then we're going to power the transmitter back on before connecting power to the boat. Go ahead, power up the boat, and retest. This can resolve 99% of the issues that we see with this boat.
Now, if your boat still isn't turning properly, we have one other step, but we're going to cover that in just a moment after we cover throttle problems because the diagnosis of both the steering and the throttle at the final step is the same for both channels. Moving on to throttle diagnostic problems. Now, we find commonly there are two types of throttle issues. One, where the throttle just doesn't work. When you pull the trigger, nothing happens. And then the other is when everything seems to bind properly, you have throttle signal, but maybe when you pull the trigger, the propeller doesn't spin at all, but there is some noise in the boat. Now, because we covered it earlier, we shouldn't have a problem, but usually when that's the case, it's because the running hardware hasn't been tightened down and it's spinning, but the drive dog isn't connected properly to the flex shaft, and so you're not getting the proper prop, the rotation that you would normally get. So if you do have connection, you do have throttle, and everything seems to be working, but the prop isn't actually spinning, go back, double check all that hardware and make sure that everything is snug and secure. There's certainly no harm in using a little bit of Loctite on these grub screws, but make sure that you're checking them frequently, because the vibrations that happen in radio-controlled boats will often frequently break these things loose, even when you're using a little bit of Loctite.
So if you're experiencing an issue where your boat is arming, you're receiving the 3 tones from your motor when the battery is plugged in, but you're not getting any input from your transmitter throttle channel. Steering servo works fine, left and right, but no throttle input. This one simple procedure, we can diagnose your steering servo, your electronic speed control, or your radio system. First, you need to become familiar with these electronic components. You need to locate the steering servo, which is directly connected to the steering wire from the rudder of the boat. You can follow this metal rod through the stern of the boat and find it connected to the servo. Once you've located the servo, you can follow the signal wires coming from that servo. These wires are going to connect to your receiver. You can confirm this is your receiver by following the single wire out of the receiver, and you'll notice this is the antenna that protrudes from the boat. Back to that receiver, if you follow the other connection that is coming from channel 2, you will follow these signal wires back up the boat over the motor mount and find your electronic speed control. This is the device that has a blue connector that you plug your battery into. Now that you're familiar with all of the electronic components inside of your boat, let's go ahead and start the diagnosis process. First, let's start out with the receiver. Make sure that channel 1 of the receiver has the steering servo wires connected, and make sure that channel 2 of the receiver has the ESC signal wires connected. Both of these plugs should be connected with the lighter color wire orientated towards the top of the receiver, or the side of the receiver that has the label on it showing the channels 1 and 2. Once you've confirmed that these connections are secure and in the proper channels, we need to make sure that the motor and ESC connection is secure. You're going to need to remove the small foam block in the bow of the boat. This is only to secure the ESC in position. After that foam block has been removed, you will find 3 wires coming from the motor. These are the only 3 wires that come from the motor of the boat, so they are easy to find. You need to make sure that all 3 of these connections are secure. Okay, now that we've confirmed all of the connections are secure inside of the boat, let's move on with the diagnosis process. What we need to do is we need to remove both plugs from the receiver. And what we're going to do is we're going to plug these in the opposite orientation that they came from. So originally your steering servo was in channel 1. Now we're going to connect the ESC signal wires to channel 1, and we're going to connect the steering servo wires to channel 2. With these plugs securely connected to the receiver, what we're going to do is power on your transmitter and then connect the battery to the boat.
Make sure that the prop is off the boat, or at the bare minimum that it's up on the stand and free and clear from anything that could get snagged or tangled up or damaged. Make sure you power up your transmitter first, then power up the boat, start with the throttle, and pull the trigger. When pulling the trigger, the rudder should move. With the steering wheel, turn the steering wheel very slightly in one direction than the other, keeping in mind that this is going to spin the prop. Now, what we're doing here is we're trying to determine that the channel that's not working properly is either the receiver or the component that is attached to the receiver itself. If you find that you've plugged the servo in the opposite channel and the servo is now working, we can determine that the servo operates properly and eliminate that from the cause of the problem. If you've swapped the wire into both channel 1 and channel 2 and there is still no movement from the rudder, we can determine that there might be an issue with the servo and you would want to contact our customer service department. Much in the same way, if you've swapped your throttle from channel 2 to channel 1 and you find that it now works, we can safely say that the speed control is working properly. If you cannot get the prop to spin in channel 1 or channel 2, there may be an issue with the speed control and we'd like you to contact customer service.
Now, in result of swapping these wires and plugs from channel 1 to channel 2, if you run across an issue such as your steering servo worked in channel 1 but your throttle was not working in channel 2, you go ahead and you swap those plugs. Now you have your steering servo in channel 2 and your ESC in channel 1. The working steering servo from channel 1, if this servo is not working when connected to channel 2, this is a sign that you may have an issue with the receiver or transmitter, and you'll need to contact the customer service department to further troubleshoot.
All right, so we've gone over our pre-run checklist. We've gone over common things that we've found that can sometimes trip up brand new barbed wire owners. If you find that this video hasn't corrected the issue, we invite you to reach out to our customer service team so we can correct the problem and get you out on the water as soon as possible. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Jeff.
And we're from Atomik RC. Thanks for buying our boat. We hope to see you out on the water real soon.